Nina buys a house. Alex keeps renting the place next door. Same income, same savings, same city, same year. 20 years later, one of them has a number that looks incredible on paper, and it's not the one you'd guess, for a reason almost nobody puts in these videos. It involves the IRS, and it changes everything. Nina and Alex are both 30. Both earn $75,000 a year. Both have $75,000 saved, after years of the exact same boring discipline, driving the same car a little too long, splitting a pizza instead of ordering two. Nina wants roots. A door she can paint any color she wants, a yard she'll get weirdly territorial about, a place that's hers in a way an apartment never quite is. Alex wants options. The idea of one address for the next 30 years makes her a little uneasy. She likes knowing she could leave a city in 6 weeks if she needed to. Those two temperaments are about to produce two very different balance sheets. Nina finds a 3-bedroom for $325,000. She puts 20% down, $65,000, leaving a $260,000 mortgage. Closing costs run about $8,000. Inspection, title, lender fees, the stack of paperwork nobody reads all the way through. That's $73,000 of her $75,000 gone before she's moved a single box in, with $2,000 left over for the inevitable first-week emergency. She locks a 30-year fixed mortgage at 7%. Principal and interest, about $1,730 a month. Add property taxes around $298, insurance around $125, and $271 set aside monthly for maintenance, roughly 1% of the home's value a year, the standard rule of thumb. Total housing cost, $2,424 a month. Alex rents a comparable place 2 streets over for $1,900 a month. No property tax, no insurance premium, no maintenance fund. If the furnace dies, that's a phone call to a landlord, not a phone call to a contractor with a checkbook. That's a $524 monthly gap in Alex's favor. She doesn't spend it. She keeps her $75,000 in a broad index fund and automates the $524 into it every month, on top of what's already there. Here's the part almost nobody shows. In Nina's very first mortgage payment, about $1,500 of that $1,730 is interest. Only around $230 actually reduces what she owes. The other $2,194 of her $2,424 monthly cost, interest, tax, insurance, maintenance fund, isn't building anything. It's the price of shelter, same as Alex's rent check, just wearing a nicer outfit. That doesn't make buying a bad decision. It makes rent is throwing money away, a mortgage is an investment, a line that only survives if nobody looks at month 1. 3 years in, Nina's mortgage balance has dropped from $260,000 to about $251,500. She's paid down roughly $8,500 of principal. Her home, appreciating at a modest 3 to 4% a year, is now worth somewhere between $355,000 and $366,000. Subtract what she still owes and her equity sits around $104,000 to $114,000. Alex's original $75,000, compounding at a 10% average annual return, has grown to roughly $100,000 on its own. Add 3 years of that $524 a month habit, and her portfolio is sitting around $114,500. They're neck and neck. Nina has a house with her name on the deed. Alex has a number in an app and the freedom to leave the city by Friday. Neither one has won anything yet. Here's where the two paths start pulling apart, and it happens quietly on both sides. Nina's principal and interest payment is frozen for 30 years, that $1,730 never moves. But her property tax and insurance climb as the home's value climbs, and the repair bills get more ambitious as the house ages. A water heater doesn't care what year it is. Alex's rent, meanwhile, creeps up. $1,900 becomes $1,957, then $2,015, roughly 3% a year, the same pace her landlord has clearly decided is fair. That $524 monthly advantage she started with shrinks every single year. It doesn't disappear, but it stops being the gift it was in year 1. Here's the number that decides most of this comparison, and it has nothing to do with houses. What $75,000 does when it's not spent on a down payment. Left alone in the market, that money doesn't know or care whether Nina bought a house with the other $75,000 she didn't have. It just, over 20 years at 10% a year, $75,000 becomes roughly $500,000 on its own, before a single additional dollar gets added. That's the real cost of a down payment, not the $65,000 itself, but the 2 decades it didn't spend growing somewhere else. Nina is 40. Her home has appreciated to somewhere between $437,000 and $481,000. Her mortgage balance has fallen to about $223,000. That puts her equity at roughly $214,000 to $258,000. Alex's original $75,000 alone is now worth about $194,000. Her monthly contributions, averaging out as her savings gap slowly narrowed, have added another $90,000 or so on top. Total portfolio, roughly $280,000 to $290,000. Alex is modestly ahead. But notice something, Nina's number is completely locked inside a house on one street. Alex's number is sitting in an account she could touch by Thursday. Nina is 50. Her home, still appreciating at 3 to 4%, is now worth somewhere between $587,000 and $712,000. Her mortgage has 10 years left and a balance of about $149,000. Equity, roughly $438,000 to $563,000. Alex's original $75,000 alone has grown to about $505,000. 2 decades of monthly contributions, smaller near the end as rent caught up, but never stopping, add roughly another $230,000. Her total portfolio, somewhere around $700,000 to $735,000. On raw net worth, Alex is clearly ahead. This is usually where a video like this ends, with a winner declared and a subscribe button. It shouldn't be, because the number everyone's about to compare isn't actually the number that lands in either of their pockets. If Nina sells, she doesn't keep $563,000. She pays roughly 7% in agent commissions and closing costs, call it $45,000, and pays off her remaining $149,000 mortgage. What's left after the dust settles is closer to $370,000 to $500,000 in cash. But here's the part that almost never gets mentioned. That gain is very likely tax-free. The IRS lets a single homeowner exclude up to $250,000 of profit on the sale of a primary residence, $500,000 for a married couple, and Nina's roughly $260,000 to $390,000 gain on the house falls entirely, or almost entirely, under that shield. She may owe nothing at all on it. Alex's $700,000 plus portfolio doesn't get that treatment. When she eventually sells to actually use the money, the gains above what she originally put in are taxed as long-term capital gains, 15% for most people in her bracket. Of that roughly $700,000, something like $525,000 is pure growth, not her own contributions. 15% of that is about $79,000 gone to the IRS the moment she wants to spend it. Run both numbers after tax and after selling costs, and the gap that looked like $150,000 to $200,000 in Alex's favor shrinks to something closer to $50,000 to $80,000 on 2 decades of completely different lifestyles, completely different risk, and completely different flexibility. That's the real twist. The tax code is quietly on the homeowner's side in a way almost nobody accounts for when they build these spreadsheets. None of this means renting was the wrong call, and it doesn't mean Alex's number is fake. It's real money, it's liquid, and she never had to think about a roof. But her result depends entirely on one unglamorous behavior. She had to actually invest the $524 every single month for 20 years, including the year the market dropped 20% and every financial channel on the internet was calmly explaining why this time was different. A mortgage doesn't ask Nina whether she feels like paying it this month. The bank already decided. That's a forced savings account with a stranger enforcing the rules. And behaviorally, over 20 years, that discipline gap is where a lot of should have invested the difference plans quietly go to die. Buying has its own weak spots too. If Nina had sold in year 3, the closing costs going in and the selling costs coming out could have erased most of her equity gain. Buying needs time to work. She also can't rebalance her way out of a bad neighborhood the way Alex can rebalance out of a bad sector. Alex owns a slice of thousands of companies. Nina owns one house on one street. And if Nina needs $20,000 fast, she's refinancing or borrowing against equity. Alex just sells part of a fund from her phone. It depends on 2 questions, and they matter more than any number in this video. How long are you staying? Buying rewards patience. 7+ years lets the transaction costs get absorbed and the fixed payments start working for you as rents rise around it. Leave in 3 years and the math usually punishes you. And if you rent, will you actually invest the difference? Because Alex's entire $700,000 result depends on a habit that's easy to describe and genuinely hard to keep for 20 straight years. The spreadsheet assumes discipline. People don't always. And if you rent, will you actually invest the difference? Because Alex's entire $700,000 result depends on a habit that's easy to describe and genuinely hard to keep for 20 straight years. The spreadsheet assumes discipline. People don't always. One rough tool worth knowing: divide the home price by a comparable home's annual rent. Nina's $325,000 house divided by $22,800 in annual rent gives a price-to-rent ratio around 14, generally the range where buying is worth serious consideration. Push that ratio past 20 and renting usually gets more competitive, though rates, taxes, and your own plan still matter more than one ratio ever will. 20 years in, Nina has a paid-down house worth $500,000 and a shield around most of that gain that Alex doesn't get. Alex has a bigger number and the freedom to have left 3 different cities along the way. After taxes and selling costs, the gap between them is smaller than either of their headline numbers suggests, and it was never really about houses versus stocks. It was about which one of them actually followed through on the plan they made on day 1. So next time someone tells you renting is throwing money away or buying is a trap, ask if they ran the numbers after the moving truck, the closing costs, and the tax bill. Because that's the only version of this math that actually tells you anything.